thing that I will say that is so important, and this can definitely be correlated with narcissistic family models and narcissistic parents, but not necessarily. What I'm about to say actually applies to every single family on the face of the planet, which is that your relationship with your spouse is exactly what your child is going to mirror when they grow up and they start dating. So for me, for example, my father was a very um, authoritative, dominating man. Not that there's anything wrong in theory with men being more dominant. Men naturally are more dominant. That's okay. But if a man is not healed, if a man is
Mm.
unhealthy and dominant, that's where it becomes very dangerous. That's where it becomes abusive. And so my father was very, very mean to my mom. He didn't physically abuse her in front of me or anything like that. But he would verbally put her down. He would make fun of her intelligence all the time. And my mom, she modeled for me that that behavior was okay because she allowed it. She just allowed it. She would, laugh off the things that he would say to her, even though he was clearly bullying her and belittling her. He had a lot of issues with women in general. So the way that I saw my father communicate about women really affected me negatively, and I'll get into that. But essentially, he was programming me. And again, it's unconscious because a lot of these parents, they're just so out of touch with themselves. They haven't done any work on themselves. So he was essentially programming me and his other daughters to believe that, we were inferior to men, and also that, we didn't deserve to be treated well by a man because my mom didn't demand good treatment for herself. She completely allowed my father to walk all over her. He, regularly made fun of her intelligence. And when I grew up and tried to get into business myself, I struggled a lot with codependency where I needed male business partners because I felt like inferior as a woman that I couldn't do it myself. And it took me a long time to figure out, why do I feel so like, why do I lack so much confidence in business? Like I feel like deep down I should be able to do this. I'm smart, I'm motivated. What's the deal here? And it took me a long time to piece that together where I realized, oh, my dad, he always belittled my mom, and I took on the belief that as a woman, I'm just stupid. I'm going to need a man. And I ended up attracting a narcissist as a partner for many years. I was with him for 4 years. We had a business together, we had a whole life together, and he basically just put me through the same pattern. It took me years to figure it out, but I essentially just became my mother. I just became super complacent with the way that he would treat me. He was very manipulative, very abusive, did not lift me up, did not want me to feel confident about myself. And it was a direct mirror of what I saw from my parents growing up. And the craziest thing about this, Wanda, I was actually just discussing this with a friend last night, is, my dad actually kind of is living out his karma because my dad, when we all grew up and started dating, my dad would get very frustrated with us for the that we would date. He would be like, "What the hell? You're with this guy, and he's a he doesn't treat you well and all this." But it's like, Dad, like, how did you treat mom? So for all of the parents listening, I really want to encourage you to think about that. How do you treat your wife, or how do you treat your husband? That is exactly what your son or daughter is going to manifest in a partner when they grow up. So the most important relationship in life is not the relationship with your children. The most important relationship in your life, and I'm going to get emotional, but the most important relationship in your life is the one with your spouse. That is number one. If you do not have a strong foundation with your husband or with your wife, you are going to set your children up for that same toxicity. And it doesn't matter what you tell the children. Children will do what you do, not what you say. So you can preach to the children all day about this is the way and this is what you got to do and this is how to live, but they're going to pick up on your behavior. They're going to model after exactly what you're doing. So, to sum up, and I'm happy to answer any more questions. I have a little more time, but to sum up, I would just say Narcissistic parenting is when the parent projects onto the child their own insecurities. They make the child serve them, and they make the child feel guilty if they're not doing what they want. And understand that this is just a repetition compulsion from the parent's childhood. A lot of times it's basically like an energy of like, well, I did it, so now it's your turn. They don't see anything wrong with it, and they don't want to be the one to break the family line because they feel like that's unfair. They feel like, well, wait a minute, why should I be the one now to let my child live as authentically them when I didn't get to do that? And it's hard. I get it. It sucks. It sucks to be the only one in your family to start to stand up and take responsibility and say, no more, no more. Something was fundamentally wrong with the way that my parents raised me, and I'm not going to pass that on to my kid. But the easier route, Wanda, the easier route is to just repeat the cycle and do the exact same thing. Um, Another thing I want to touch on quick is that, a lot of times parents will attribute their better parenting, like, oh, I'm a much better parent than my mom was, or I'm a much better dad than my dad was growing up. They'll attribute it to different personality traits. So, for example, like, well, my dad growing up never, was around, and he didn't go to any of my soccer games, and I go to every single one of my kids' soccer games. So I'm a different parent, I'm a better parent. Careful, because just because you exhibit different behavioral traits or personality qualities doesn't actually mean you're not still parenting your child from a place of, hey, what can this kid do for me? What can they do for me, as opposed to what I can do for them? So the father who was absent all the time, he was also acting from a place of, what can this child do for me, in a sense of, this child could just leave me alone. I don't want to be bothered. I want to work. I don't want to have to be bogged down with parenting. So what can this child do for me? Not bother me. Leave me alone. And that kid was probably programmed to like not not disturb daddy, right? But the dad who grows up and does go to every one of his kids' soccer games and is super involved in his kid's life, he could still be operating from a place of narcissism where he's thinking, what can this
Mm,
kid do for me? It's just a different flavor. It's just like, this kid's gonna be the best kid on the soccer team for me so that I look good. This kid's gonna get straight A's for me so that I look good. So I'm gonna go to every one of the school conferences, and I'm gonna be right there by his side. And it can appear like, oh wow, what a loving, amazing parent. But if they're not healed, and if they haven't resolved their own childhood trauma, they're not going to be doing it from a genuine place of, you know what, I'm really just here because I love my kid. I want them to be authentically them. I want them to thrive. They're going to be doing it from a place of, I want this kid to make me look good. And that's still narcissistic parenting.